I never believed in arranged marriages, especially not in a small town where everyone remembers the mistakes you made at 17. But before this became an arranged marriage love story, it was just a story about a girl who came home when she didn't want to. My name's Emma Caldwell, and the day I drove back to my family's ranch, the fields looked nothing like the place I left behind. The grass was dry and brittle, the barn roof sagged like it had given up, and the smell of dust clung to everything, even to my memories. I killed the engine and just sat there, staring at the porch swing still moving in the wind. It creaked like an old memory calling my name. I wanted to turn the truck around and keep driving until the past was nothing but a rearview mirror. But Dad needed me, and guilt has a way of making you stay. When I walked inside, I found him in the kitchen, thinner than I remembered, but still trying to look strong. He smiled that half smile I'd missed and said, "You always did come home when the work got hard." And just like that, my heart broke and healed. At the same time, the Caldwell Ranch had been in our family for 3 generations. It wasn't just land, it was legacy. But legacy doesn't pay bank loans, and I could already feel the weight of those debts in the silence between us. I spent the first few weeks knee-deep in mud and paperwork trying to save what was left. I fixed fences, argued with suppliers, and promised myself I could do this alone. I always believed if I just worked hard enough, loved strong enough, I could fix anything. But some things, like dying crops and broken pride, don't heal with effort. Every morning, I'd see the Hayes Ranch across the fence line. Their land stretched further, their fences straighter. And somewhere out there was Luke Hayes, the one man I'd spent half my life trying to forget. Luke and I had grown up across that fence, competing over everything: who could ride faster, work longer, or stay up later at bonfire nights. He was older, stronger, and infuriatingly confident. And one night, at a county rodeo, he made a joke, a cruel one, that left me humiliated in front of everyone. I swore I'd never speak to him again, and I kept that promise until life had other plans. The first time I saw him again, it was by accident. I was unloading feed from the truck when his old Chevy pulled up to the gate. He leaned out the window wearing that same arrogant grin and said, "Well, I'll be damned. The prodigal daughter returns." I didn't answer, just kept working, my hands steady even though my heart was not. He chuckled. "You still mad about something that happened a decade ago?" "Depends," I said, without looking up. "Are you still the same jerk who thought embarrassing a girl was funny?" He didn't reply right away. For a second, his smirk faded. Then he tipped his hat and said quietly, "Guess I deserved that," and drove off. That night, as I stood by the fence line, I could see his ranch lights flickering in the distance. I told myself I hated him, that I'd never let a man like Luke Hayes have the power to hurt me again. But the truth is, hate is just another way to keep someone close. A week later, the first storm rolled in. Not rain, debt. Mom handed me the bank letter with trembling hands. The ranch was closer to foreclosure than Dad had admitted. The numbers blurred in front of my eyes, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. Years of hard work, late nights, and sacrifice, and it still wasn't enough. I remember stepping outside, the wind carrying the smell of rain that never came. Across the field, Luke's truck headlights flashed once, like he'd just pulled in from the past to remind me he was still there. That's when Mom's voice broke through the noise. "There might be another way," she said softly, holding a letter of her own. I turned. "Another way to what?" "To save the ranch," she whispered. "But you're not gonna like it." And that, right there, was the moment everything began to change. Before I tell you what she said next, I just want to thank you for listening to this story. If you've ever loved someone you swore you couldn't stand or fought for something you thought you'd already lost, hit like. It lets me know I'm not alone in this. And if you're watching from a small town, drop the name of your hometown in the comments. I'd love to see how far these stories travel. Because what happened after that night changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the man I swore I'd never forgive.
When my mother said there was another way, I didn't realize she meant marriage. Not love, not partnership, not even romance. Just a transaction wearing a wedding dress. She sat at the kitchen table that night, the old oil lamp throwing shadows across her face. The kind of shadows that make people look older, sadder, truer. Dad was silent beside her, his hands trembling against the coffee mug. I could hear the wind rattling the window frames, and somehow it sounded like warning. Luke's parents came by today, she said carefully, as if testing the weight of every word before dropping it between us. They're in trouble too. The Hayes Ranch isn't what it used to be. They're struggling with the same drought, the same bank, the same everything. I frowned, unsure where this was going. That's awful, but they made a proposal, she interrupted. If our families merge the properties, the bank might consider extending both loans. It would keep everything in the family lines. But the only way to make it official is through a union. I laughed, a sharp, nervous sound that didn't feel like mine. A union? You mean a partnership? A business agreement? Mom's eyes softened. A marriage, Emma. The word landed like a stone in my chest. I looked at her, then at Dad. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He said, "We wouldn't ask if there was another option. You know that." "No," I shook my head. "You're not serious. You can't be." But the silence that followed said otherwise. I stood up, pacing, my boots thudding against the wooden floor. "Out of all the men in this county, you want me to marry him? Luke Hayes? The same man who once bet his friends I couldn't last 5 seconds on a bull and then laughed when I fell? That man?" Mom sighed. "People change, sweetheart. Not him," I said, my voice cracking. "And not me." She reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. "Sometimes life doesn't give us choices. It gives us chances. Ugly, hard, inconvenient chances, but still, chances." I pulled away. I wanted to scream that love should never come with a contract, that marriage should mean more than a survival plan. But then I looked at Dad. His cough had gotten worse, and his hands were trembling just holding his coffee. And I realized this wasn't about me. It was about them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood on the porch, wrapped in my father's old jacket, staring out at the dark horizon. Somewhere out there was the Hayes Ranch, and Luke, probably asleep, completely unaware of the absurd plan our parents were plotting. Part of me wanted to march over there, wake him up, and tell him exactly what I thought of it. But a bigger part of me, the one that had learned the hard way that pride doesn't pay bills, stayed quiet. 2 days later, Luke showed up at our gate. He looked the same and entirely different. The same confident stance, the same weathered hands, the same glint of mischief in his eyes. But there was something new too. Exhaustion, maybe. Or regret. He leaned on the fence post. "So, I heard our parents have decided to turn us into a fairy tale." I crossed my arms. "Fairy tale? That's a generous word." He smiled faintly. "Tragic comedy, then?" I wanted to hate him for sounding so calm, so damn Luke. But when I met his eyes, I saw the same dread I felt. "Tell me you said no," I muttered. He shrugged. "I did. My dad nearly had a heart attack. The bank's closing in. They're desperate. Same here."
For a moment, silence stretched between us, heavy, charged, full of all the things we didn't say. He broke it first. "You know this is insane, right?" "Completely. And we'd kill each other within a week? Probably less." He gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Guess that's one thing we still agree on." Then his expression shifted. "But if this helps your family and mine, maybe it's worth hating each other a little longer." My chest tightened. "Would you actually go through with it?" He looked at me, his voice low. I'd do anything for my parents. Wouldn't you? That one question undid me. Because yes, I would. And that's how it began. Not with love, not even with trust. Just two stubborn people, backed into a corner by loyalty. The next week blurred by in a storm of paperwork, whispers, and disbelief. The town buzzed with gossip. An arranged marriage love story in the middle of nowhere between two people who could barely share a fence line without arguing. Some called it romantic, others stupid, but everyone called it inevitable. On the morning we signed the first agreement, Luke stood beside me outside the courthouse. He didn't look at me. I didn't look at him. The lawyer droned on about contracts, land, and merging assets, words that sounded colder than they should have. But when I signed my name next to his, something in the air shifted. Not magic, just reality. Afterward, as we stepped outside, he finally looked at me. "Guess this makes it official," he said. "Guess so." The wind caught my hair, brushing it across my face. He reached out, almost without thinking, and tucked a loose strand behind my ear. The gesture was small, too small, but it froze me, because for the first time in years, his touch didn't feel like mockery. It felt like something else, something I wasn't ready to name. Before I could say anything, he stepped back. "See you at the altar, Caldwell." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me standing there, wondering if the line between duty and desire was already starting to blur.
If you've ever wondered what it feels like to say "I do" to someone you can barely stand, let me save you the trouble. It feels like standing on a cliff, smiling for the crowd while praying the ground doesn't give out beneath you. The wedding was small, quiet, and nothing like I'd imagined as a little girl. No lace, no music, no happy tears. Just the courthouse, our parents, a few curious neighbors, and the sound of a pen scratching across paper as I became Emma Hayes. When the judge asked if I took this man to be my lawfully wedded husband, I hesitated just long enough to hear a few people shift in their seats. Luke turned slightly toward me, one eyebrow raised, the ghost of a smirk on his lips. "Well," he murmured. I shot him a glare. "Don't push your luck." Then I said it. "I do." The words tasted like dust and irony. The crowd clapped politely, and just like that, the deed was done. An arranged marriage love story, they'd call it later in whispers and gossip. But in that moment, it felt more like a business deal sealed with a curse. Outside, the air was hot and dry, the kind of summer heat that steals your breath. We walked to the trucks without speaking, our shadows long and parallel on the dirt road. I could feel every stare, every whispered theory about how two lifelong rivals had ended up sharing a last name. When we reached the parking lot, Luke broke the silence. "Didn't think you'd go through with it." "Didn't think you'd clean up so well," I shot back. He grinned, looking down at his crisp white shirt and borrowed tie. "Guess we both like proving people wrong." That was the thing about Luke. Every word from his mouth felt like a dare. And part of me, the reckless part I'd tried to bury years ago, always wanted to take it. We didn't even have a honeymoon. Just a dusty drive back to the ranch, our ranch now, a patchwork of his and mine joined not by love, but by law. When we arrived, Luke stopped his truck beside the old barn. "Where do you want to stay?" he asked, scratching the back of his neck. "The Caldwell house or mine?" I folded my arms. "We'll stay here. My parents need help and I'm not leaving them." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll move into the guest room." "Good," I said. "Fine," he replied. And that was our first marital agreement. Cold, practical, and somehow more binding than our vows. Over the next few days, we fell into an uneasy rhythm. He fixed fences and checked irrigation. I handled the crops and paperwork. We worked side by side, but never together. Every conversation was a standoff. Words loaded, glances guarded. The only time we didn't argue was when we were too tired to speak. But even silence can say too much. Sometimes when the sun dipped low and the sky turned that impossible shade of gold, I'd catch him looking at me. Not like before, not with arrogance, but with something softer, something he didn't want me to see. And every time I caught him, he'd look away, pretending he hadn't. One night, about 2 weeks after the wedding, Mom invited him to dinner. I tried to object, said we were both too busy, but she insisted. It's time we make this feel like a home, not a battlefield. Luke showed up early, carrying a bottle of wine. Truce offering, he said, handing it to me. I eyed it. You sure this isn't poison? He smirked. If it was, I'd let you pour mine first. At dinner, Dad was quiet, watching us like a man measuring the distance between two storms. Luke was polite, charming even. He asked about the crops, fixed Mom's leaky faucet after dessert, and helped clear the table. It should have annoyed me, the way he played the good husband, but instead, it just confused me. Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, I found him out on the porch, leaning against the railing, looking out over the moonlit fields. You put on quite the show tonight, I said, crossing my arms. He turned, half smiling. Guess I'm not as bad as you remember. Don't flatter yourself, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. For a moment, we just stood there. The air smelled like rain that never came. Crickets hummed somewhere in the tall grass. He looked at me then, really looked at me. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to look away. You know, he said softly, I didn't mean what I said that night at the rodeo. I was young, stupid, mean, I added. He nodded. That too. I wanted to believe him, but believing meant trusting, and trust was a luxury I'd run out of. Still, something in his voice made me pause. Why bring it up now? I asked. He shrugged. Figured it's about time we stop pretending the past didn't happen. We can't build anything on silence. I wanted to tell him we weren't building anything, that this wasn't love, it was logistics. But the words never came out, because deep down, I wasn't sure that was true anymore. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. Strong, dark, and unexpected. Luke was in the kitchen, already dressed for work. Coffee? He asked, handing me a mug. I took it, careful not to touch his hand. Thanks. Don't mention it, he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Wouldn't want my wife collapsing before sunrise. His wife. The word felt strange, wrong, and right, all at once. Before I could answer, Mom's voice called from outside. Something in her tone made me freeze. Luke and I ran out to find her by the barn, holding another letter from the bank. Her eyes were wide, her hands shaking. She whispered, "They're moving faster than we thought. We might lose everything unless the first payment goes through by next month." And just like that, the fragile truce between Luke and I snapped back into survival mode. We weren't lovers. We weren't even friends. We were two people fighting the same storm and starting to realize it might take both of us to survive it. If someone had told me that sharing a kitchen with Luke Hayes could feel like standing too close to a fire, I would have laughed. But that morning, the morning the bank letter arrived, something shifted. Maybe it was the fear in my mother's voice. Maybe it was the way Luke immediately stepped closer, like protecting my family was suddenly his responsibility too. Or maybe it was just the first time I'd really looked at him since the wedding. Sweaty, dirt on his boots, determination in his eyes. A man raised by land, loss, and too much responsibility. We spent the rest of the day working together, barely speaking, but somehow moving in sync, fixing irrigation lines, checking the soil, repairing fences that had been ignored for months. Small-town ranch life doesn't give you time to process emotions. It just hands you a shovel and tells you to keep digging. At one point, Luke lifted a fallen beam blocking the barn entrance. His muscles strained, his shirt sticking to his back. I tried not to stare. Really, I did. He glanced at me breathless. "You gonna help, Caldwell, or just enjoy the view?" He rushed up my neck. I wasn't. He winked.
Relax, I'm just messing with you. But my pulse didn't get the memo. That evening, Mom insisted we host dinner again, this time inviting the Hayes family. I didn't want to socialize. I wanted to crawl into bed and forget the world. But duty called. And in a marriage of convenience, duty didn't care about exhaustion. The Hayeses showed up right at sunset. Mrs. Hayes hugged me like she'd been waiting her whole life for this arrangement. Mr. Hayes slapped Luke's back proudly, as if he'd single-handedly rescued both ranches. I tried to ignore the pressure squeezing my chest. Dinner was loud, warm, nostalgic for everyone except me. Luke sat beside me, uncomfortably close, his arm brushing mine every time he reached for something. Every accidental touch felt like static. At one point, Mrs. Hayes said, "I always knew you two would end up together." I nearly choked on my water. Luke coughed into his napkin. We both avoided eye contact. When dinner ended, people lingered on the porch, sharing stories from years ago. I slipped away toward the barn, needing quiet air. That's when it happened. I walked in on Luke talking to his father. They didn't see me. I stayed hidden behind the old tack cabinet, frozen by the tone of their voices. Mr. Hayes said, low and tired, "You know this marriage solves everything, son. Once the bank approves the merger, we're safe. You and Emma can go your separate ways if you want." My heart stumbled.
I shouldn't have listened, but I did. Luke's reply was quiet, almost ashamed. I know, this whole marriage thing, it's temporary, just long enough for the paperwork. After that, she won't want to stay anyway. My stomach twisted. His father sighed. Just do your part. Be civil. Pretend if you have to. I am pretending, Dad. A pause. Emma and I don't work. We never will. I backed away before they could see me, blinking hard, swallowing the sting in my throat. The floor felt unsteady, my breath shaky. Temporary. Pretend. We never will. I shouldn't have cared. The marriage was an arrangement, but the words hit me harder than I expected. Suddenly, every accidental touch, every shared glance, every softened moment meant nothing. Just strategy, just performance, just Luke playing the role the whole town expected. I slipped outside, the night air cold against my flushed cheeks. The moon hung low over the fields, lighting up the dry grass. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to smother the ache building beneath my ribs. Footsteps approached behind me. "Emma?" Luke's voice, gentle. "You disappeared. You okay?" I wiped quickly at my face, hiding the evidence. "I'm fine." He stepped closer. "Did something happen?" "No." His eyes searched mine. "You sure?" "Yes," I said sharply. "I'm fine." His jaw tightened. Hurt, maybe. But he nodded. "All right. But if you ever want to talk—" "I don't," I interrupted. He stepped back like I'd slapped him. Something flickered in his expression. Confusion, maybe. Even disappointment. But he didn't push. Instead, he whispered, "Good night, Emma," and turned away. I watched him disappear into the darkness, feeling anger twist with something far more dangerous, heartbreak, because for the first time since returning home, I realized something I didn't want to admit. I didn't want him to pretend, and that terrified me. If there's one thing ranch life teaches you, it's that storms don't ask permission. They roll in whether you're ready or not. Outside and inside, too. After overhearing Luke that night, something inside me shut tight. Not a door, a vault. I didn't yell at him, didn't confront him, didn't ask what he meant. I just withdrew. The next morning, he stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a mug of coffee. He looked up when I walked in. "Morning," he said, almost soft. I ignored him and headed straight for the sink. He tried again. "Want coffee?" "No." "You sure? Your eyelids look like they've been sandpapered." "No, thank you." "Emma." I said, "No, Luke." Silence filled the room, thick as the humidity outside. He exhaled slowly. "Did I do something?" "No." "You're a terrible liar," he muttered. "And you're a married man who shouldn't care whether I lie or not." I snapped before I could stop myself. The mug paused halfway to his lips. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. It sure sounded like something. I grabbed my boots and headed for the porch, leaving him in confusion and me in a mess I didn't know how to untangle. That week, the weather turned heavy. The sky a deep slate gray. The air smelled like rain and regret, both of which seemed overdue. We were fixing the south fence line when Luke finally decided he'd had enough of my silence. He planted himself in front of me, hands on his hips. "All right, Caldwell, talk." "No." "Yes, because I'm not going another day working beside a woman who looks at me like I kicked her dog." "I don't have a dog." "Exactly," he said, exasperated. "So who the hell did I supposedly hurt?" I walked past him. He followed. "Emma." Nothing. "Emma." Still nothing. "Emma Caldwell Hayes, stop walking or I'll—" I spun around. "You'll what?" He froze. We were inches apart. Too close. Close enough to see the flecks of green in his brown eyes. Close enough to feel the heat radiating off him. Close enough to remember we were married, even if only on paper. He swallowed, voice lower now. "Just talk to me." For a moment, I almost did. I almost asked him why he planned to leave, why he said I'd never want to stay, why he sounded sad when he said it. But pride is louder than pain. "I don't owe you explanations," I whispered. He studied me for a long, tense second. Something about my eyes must have given me away. The hurt, the fear, the something I didn't want him to see because his face softened. "Just a little, you know," he said quietly. "For two people who aren't supposed to care, we sure spend a lot of time hurting each other." The words hit deeper than they should have. Before I could reply, thunder cracked across the sky, loud enough to make me jump. Dark clouds lunged over the hills, swallowing the afternoon light whole. Luke looked up. "That's not a normal storm." "It's early," I said. "Storm season isn't for another month. Tell that to the sky." Lightning flashed. We rushed to secure loose equipment, pulling tarps over machinery and leading horses back to shelter. The wind picked up fast, whipping dust and hay and spirals around us. At one point, I stumbled on uneven ground. Luke grabbed my waist, steadying me. My breath caught. His hand stayed there a second too long. Maybe two. "Careful," he murmured. I nodded, unable to find my voice. The wind howled, wild and merciless. The temperature dropped. "Barn!" he shouted over the noise. "Now!" We ran, shoulder to shoulder, the storm swallowing the world behind us. Inside, the doors slammed shut with a force that echoed. The rain hit the roof in sheets, thunder rattling the walls. For a moment, we just stood there, breathing hard. Then Luke took a step closer, then another. "Emma, whatever's going on between us—" "Nothing's going on," I whispered. He exhaled sharply. "You don't actually believe that." I didn't. Not even a little. Thunder rumbled. A beam of light cracked through the cracks in the wood. And in the shadows of that barn, he reached for me. Slowly, carefully, like I was something he wasn't sure he deserved to touch. I didn't move away. He tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, fingertips grazing my cheek. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. Then he whispered, voice rough, "This thing between us, you feel it too." I closed my eyes. "Luke," before I could say anything more, a violent crash shook the barn. We jumped apart. One of the hayloft beams had come loose, plummeting onto a stack of bales. "Damn it," Luke cursed, rushing toward the damage. I followed, adrenaline erasing the moment we'd just shared. We checked for fire, for structural damage, for anything else that might collapse. The roof held, barely. When the storm finally eased, we were both soaked in sweat and rainwater. Luke brushed his hair back, breathing hard. "This storm isn't over," he said. He wasn't talking about the weather. Then, as we stepped outside, the wind carried something I didn't expect to hear. Voices.
2 men from the bank, standing near their SUV, talking to my mother on the porch, papers in hand. Luke's expression hardened. Why are they here? I didn't know, but deep down, I felt the truth before I ever heard it. Whatever was coming, it wasn't good.
The men from the bank were already halfway up the porch steps when Luke and I emerged from the barn, still soaked and breathless from the storm. One of them, a tall man with a haircut too precise for a place like ours, tucked a folder against his chest and offered a stiff nod. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "we didn't expect your daughter and son-in-law to be home?" The word son-in-law felt strange, heavy, wrong. Mom forced a smile. "We weren't expecting the storm. Or you," I added, stepping beside her. The man cleared his throat. "We'll make this quick. We're here because the first loan extension hasn't been approved yet, but given the severity of the drought and the recent market changes, the board has decided to reevaluate your case." "Reevaluate?" I repeated. "Meaning what?" He opened the folder. "Meaning terms have changed, and your families will need to provide additional proof of merged assets, shared labor, and..." Luke stepped forward, jaw tightening. "We already signed papers. We did everything the bank asked." "That was before the interest hike," the man replied calmly. My stomach twisted. "So what happens now?" "You'll need to submit a secondary certification showing not just financial union, but domestic union. Evidence that the marriage is functioning, legally binding, and permanent in intent." Permanent in intent. The words slammed into me harder than the thunder we'd just escaped. I felt Luke go still beside me. "So you're saying," he said slowly, "then unless we prove this marriage is real, we'll lose the ranch." I finished. He nodded. "Exactly." My mother's face crumbled. Luke's hands clenched. I felt my pulse pounding in my throat. After the men left, I stood on the porch staring at the tire tracks disappearing into the muddy road. The storm clouds hung heavy, refusing to move on. Behind me, Luke let out a low curse. "Damn it. Damn it." Mom slipped inside to get Dad. When she was gone, Luke leaned against the porch post, rainwater dripping from his hair, breathing like the world had just landed on his shoulders. "We'll figure it out," I said quietly. "We always do." He shook his head. "This isn't fencing fences or moving cattle. This is the bank asking us to actually be married." The pain in his voice stung, not because he was wrong, but because he sounded like the idea horrified him. And that's when the truth snapped inside me. "You don't want that," I whispered. His eyes flicked toward mine. "What?" "You don't want a real marriage. Emma, you told your father the same thing." His entire body froze. He straightened slowly, eyes narrowing. "You heard that?" I swallowed, unable to stop shaking. "Yes, every word." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind rustled the wet grass. A gate creaked somewhere in the distance. The whole ranch seemed to hold its breath. Finally, he said, "It wasn't what you think." "Oh," I laughed, bitter and broken, "because what I heard was you planning the divorce before the ink was dry." He stepped toward me. "I said that because this marriage was never real to you." His nostrils flared. "It wasn't real to neither of us." The words felt like a slap. I steadied myself on the railing. "So all of this, the barn, the fence line, the mornings in the kitchen, it was just you pretending?" He hesitated, and that hesitation hurt more than any lie could have. "Emma," his voice was soft now, frighteningly soft. "It wasn't pretend. Not all of it. But enough," I whispered. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "You're twisting my words." "No, you're twisting the truth." I stepped closer. "Just say it. Say you don't want to stay married to me." He looked at me then, really looked, and something inside his eyes cracked. Fear, pride, guilt. "Emma," he said quietly. "I don't want you trapped with someone you hate." My throat tightened. "Who said I hated you?" He blinked. Once, twice, then almost too quietly. "Then why won't you look at me? Why won't you talk to me? Why did you shut down the moment we started getting close?" My breath caught. I hadn't expected him to notice or to care. He took another step forward. "Why, Emma?" I opened my mouth, but the words were tangled. "Because you said I wasn't enough. Because you said we would never work. Because I foolishly wanted you to want more. Because," I whispered, "you made it clear this marriage ends the second you get what you want." His face crumpled. "That's not what I meant, but it's what you said." The wind carried my words away, but their weight stayed between us. Luke closed his eyes, jaw tightening. "I was scared, Emma." "Of me?" I whispered. "Of us," he corrected. "Of wanting something I didn't think I had the right to want." The confession hit me like a jolt. Too honest, too late. Before I could respond, Dad stepped onto the porch, coughing violently. Mom rushed behind him. Luke immediately turned toward him. "Sit down, sir. You shouldn't be outside." Dad waved him off, but his hands trembled. I moved to help him, and Luke stepped aside, not coldly, not angrily, but with a look that tore at my chest. A look that said he'd already lost something. Mom's voice wavered. "The bank wants proof. Proof you two are committed. Proof this isn't just an arrangement." I stared at the mud on my boots. Luke stared at the sky. Dad gave a weak smile. "Marriage isn't always about love at first," he said softly. "Sometimes it's about showing up. Sometimes it's about choosing each other even when it's hard." Luke swallowed. I blinked back tears. But neither of us spoke. Dad's voice turned faint. "They want proof this marriage is real." And right there, on that porch, with rain dripping from the eaves and the storm clouds rolling in again, I realized something that hollowed me out completely. I didn't know if Luke wanted it to be real, and I didn't know if I could handle the answer. The day everything broke started out impossibly normal. The sky was clear, the air cool for late summer, the kind of morning where nothing feels dangerous, which is exactly when life tends to strike. Luke left early to repair the east pasture fence. I stayed behind to help Dad with the horses, even though my mind was still tangled with the storm of words from the night before. We hadn't spoken after the bank meeting. Not really. He tried, once, saying my name as we walked inside, but the moment he opened his mouth, I shut down. Not because I didn't want to hear him, but because I was terrified of what he might say. By mid-morning, Dad was struggling with his breathing. His cough came sharp and painful, and I insisted he rest in the den while I finished the chores. "Go check on Luke," he told me between breaths. "That storm yesterday was rough. He'll need an extra hand." But I didn't go. I told myself Luke didn't want my help, that he didn't want us. Not really. That I'd only get in the way. Looking back, I should have listened to Dad. I should have swallowed my pride. I should have gone. Because at 11:17 a.m., everything collapsed. It started with a phone call. Not a ring, but a frantic pounding against the screen door. Our neighbor, Mr. Calloway, stood on the porch, face pale, hat in hand. "Emma," he said, breathless. "It's Luke." My heartbeat stumbled. "What about him?" "There was an accident." My knees weakened. "Where?" "East pasture. The old fencing gave out. Beam fell. Horse spooked. He took the hit." The world narrowed to a pinpoint of sound. I didn't even grab my boots. I just ran. My mother shouted my name. Dad tried to sit up, coughing hard, but I couldn't stop. Not until I reached him. The grass cut at my ankles. The wind whipped my hair. The sun blinded my eyes, but I kept running until my lungs burned. When I arrived, I saw the collapsed fence first. Then the horse, trembling and wild-eyed. Then him. Luke lay half-buried under a fallen post. Dirt streaked across his face, blood along his temple. "Luke!" My voice cracked like lightning. I skidded to my knees beside him, hands trembling so violently I could barely touch him. His eyes opened just enough to see me. "Emma," he whispered. I let out a sob I didn't recognize. "Don't talk. Don't move. I'm here." He winced as he tried to breathe. "Figured you were still mad at me?" "Shut up," I said, tears spilling down my cheeks. "Just shut up, please." He gave a weak, crooked smile that almost undid me entirely.
Mr. Calloway and 2 ranch hands helped lift the beam, but every movement made Luke gasp in pain. I held his face in my hands, trying to steady him, trying to steady myself. "Stay with me," I whispered. "I'm not going anywhere," he murmured. "Good," I choked, "because I'm not ready to—" My voice broke. He blinked slowly, eyes focusing on my face like he needed to memorize it. "Emma," he whispered, "there's something I need to say, in case—" "No," I said harshly. "You don't get to talk like that." He coughed, his breath hitching. "I didn't mean the things you heard." My stomach twisted. "Not now, please not. You need to know." He swallowed hard, pain tightening his features. "He said those things because I was scared, not because they were true." I shook my head, tears falling onto his shirt. "Luke, I wasn't planning a divorce," he forced out, each word a struggle. "I was trying to convince myself not to want something I didn't think you'd ever want back." My breath went still. "I didn't want to trap you. I didn't want to hope for something real and then lose it." My heart fractured clean down the middle. Before I could answer, sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have called the paramedics. Luke squeezed my hand weakly. "Emma, say something." I leaned close, my forehead touching his. "You idiot. You absolute stubborn idiot. You think I wouldn't—" But then he went limp, his head slumped sideways, his eyes closing. "Luke," my voice rose in panic. "Luke." I shook him, heart pounding, vision blurring. "Stay with me. Do you hear me? Don't you dare." Strong arms pulled me back as the EMTs rushed in. I kicked, I screamed, I fought them, but they needed space to work. They lifted him onto a stretcher. His face was pale, too still. I'd never known how terrifying stillness could be. "Please," I whispered, following beside them. "Please don't let him—" They loaded him into the ambulance. A paramedic turned to me. "You're riding with us?" I nodded, unable to form words. Inside the ambulance, I held Luke's hand, cold, slack, lifeless feeling, and prayed harder than I ever had in my life. "Please come back to me," I whispered. "I don't care about the ranch. I don't care about the loan. I don't care about anything. Just don't leave." But he didn't answer. Hours later, in a stark hospital hallway that smelled like antiseptic and fear, I learned 3 things. 1, his injuries were serious: a broken leg, a concussion, several cracked ribs. 2, the doctors weren't sure when he'd wake up. And 3, apparently, he had told someone something I didn't expect to hear. While I was sitting alone, hands shaking, Mrs. Hayes approached me. Her eyes were red, her voice soft. "Emma, he talked about you." I looked up, dizzy. "What?" "In the waiting room, before they took him in. He said he hoped, if he made it through all this," her voice wavered, "he hoped maybe you'd let him try again, properly. Not as strangers, not as rivals, not as an arrangement." My breath caught. "He said he wanted a real marriage," she whispered. The world tilted. My knees buckled. And for the first time since the wedding,
I let myself feel everything I'd been denying. Not anger, not doubt, not pride, just love. Terrifying, inconvenient, impossible love, and the fear of losing it. The nurse pushed open the ICU door. "You can see him now," she said gently. My heart pounded, because walking into that room meant admitting something I'd run from my whole life. It meant choosing him, and that terrified me more than any storm ever could.
Hospitals have a strange way of slowing time. The clocks keep ticking, but your heart refuses to move. I sat beside Luke's bed for hours, probably longer. The steady beep of his monitors, the only proof that he was still here. His face was bruised, his leg wrapped, his breathing shallow but steady. I held his hand. I prayed. I whispered things I'd rather died than say out loud before all this happened. And then, sometime deep in the night, he stirred. His fingers twitched in mine. I shot upright. "Luke? Luke, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. He blinked, confused at first, then focused on me. Truly focused, like he needed to make sure I was real. "Emma," he croaked. I let out a breath I'd been holding for hours. "Hi." He tried to smile, but it hurt. "You look like you haven't slept. You almost died." "Yeah, I figured that part out." I choked out a weak laugh, the kind you only make when you're too close to crying. His eyes softened as he looked at me. "You've been here the whole time?" "Yes," I whispered. "Why?" That question hit deeper than he meant it to. I swallowed hard. "Because I couldn't leave. Because I didn't want to lose you." He stared at me, eyes wide and vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. "Emma, I'm so sorry." His voice cracked, raw, regretful, earnest. I shouldn't have talked about the marriage the way I did. I shouldn't have made it sound temporary. I was scared, terrified, actually. "Of what?" I whispered. He took a slow breath. "Of wanting something real with you, when I thought you'd never want me back." I figured it was easier to pretend I didn't care than risk caring too much. My throat tightened. "Luke." His fingers curled weakly around mine. "I never meant to hurt you. That day in the barn, that storm, everything I said was true. I do feel something between us. I've felt it for years. I just didn't know how to say it without screwing it up." He looked away, eyes glassy, and I screwed it up anyway. I leaned closer, brushing my thumb gently over the bandage on his temple. "We both did. I shut down instead of talking to you. I assumed the worst. I let the past decide our future." His gaze found mine again, steady, warm, despite the pain. "So where does that leave us?" he asked softly. My answer was simple, but it took every ounce of courage I had. "It leaves us exactly where we should have been all along. Two stubborn people finally telling the truth." He let out a shaky breath, almost a laugh. "God, Emma, I placed a hand on his chest, right above his heart. "You don't have to say anything right now. Just come home when you're ready. We'll figure the rest out together." His eyes closed for a moment, like the weight of the world was finally easing off his shoulders. "Together," he repeated. I like that. Luke stayed in the hospital for 4 days. I stayed all 4. When he finally returned to the ranch, leaning heavily on crutches, Mom cried. Dad hugged him like a son. And for the first time since the arrangement began, it didn't feel like a business deal. It felt like family. The following week, the bank approved the extension, with a note that our marriage appeared stable and ongoing. Luke smirked when he read it. Stable. Huh? I slapped his arm. Gently. Don't make me revoke it, he grinned. But this time, it wasn't a teasing, self-protecting grin. It was hope. One morning, just before sunrise, I found him outside staring at the field that had been ruined by drought.
The soil was cracked, dry, a graveyard of lost seasons. He didn't hear me walk up. "What are you thinking?" I asked quietly. He exhaled slowly. "That maybe it's time we start over. With the land? With everything." He turned toward me. And for the first time, he didn't look like the boy who humiliated me or the man forced into a marriage he didn't want. He looked like someone choosing me, choosing us on purpose. My chest tightened. "You really mean that?" He nodded. "Yeah, I do." Then he handed me a pair of gloves. "Help me replant this?" I stared at the field, barren, broken, but waiting. "Yeah," I whispered. "Let's do it." We worked side by side, fingers deep in the soil, our hands brushing again and again, not by accident this time. The sun slowly climbed over the hills, washing gold over the land. At one point, Luke paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "You know," he said softly, "we said I do for all the wrong reasons." I smiled, heartful. "Yeah, we did. But staying?" He met my eyes. "That's for the right ones." A lump formed in my throat. We planted the last row just as sunlight spilled across the field. Luke took my dirt-covered hand in his and squeezed. "We didn't just save the land," I whispered. He leaned his forehead against mine, his voice warm and sure. "No," he murmured. "We saved each other." If you're still here sharing this moment with me, thank you. This story, our story, has been an emotional journey about heartbreak, forgiveness, and choosing love even when pride tries to pull you apart. If this touched your heart in any way, please like this video. It helps our small community grow. And if you want more real hearts, real stories, real possibilities, make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because somewhere out there, someone else might need to hear this. Love isn't always born. Sometimes it's built, one choice at a time.